Welcome, viewers, to episode 70. Yes, that's right, 70 of the ForensicWeek.com show, brought to you by Forensic IQ Incorporated. I'm your host, Tom Moriello, CEO of Forensic IQ and professor at the University of Maryland, Department of Criminology and Criminal Justice in College Park, Maryland. Coming to you this evening from Indian Shores, Florida, where I've been spending the winter break between semesters and having a great time. Tonight, ladies and gentlemen, forensic interviewing in child abuse cases. We have a distinguished panel of guests from the child advocacy and juvenile justice communities. Currently, there is some controversy in regards to whether or not some prosecutors are choosing to use or not use forensic interviewing to assist the child with pretrial preparations and investigations for evidence and convictions. Should there be special consideration used in these most delicate collection of testimony from child victims of abuse and neglect? We'll find out this evening. But first, let me introduce the ForensicWeek.com student crew for you this evening. We have Laura Pachuki, our producer of the show. She's a graduate student from the George Washington University Department of Forensic Sciences. We also have our co-producer, Jamal Francis, who's not with us this evening. He's a University of Maryland undergraduate sociology major who has actively been involved in producing some technical material for us, and the semester just began this week, and he won't be with us tonight, but you will see one of our new closing videos that we have. Folks, you are watching ForensicWeek.com, a talk show that features real forensic science by real forensic scientists, educators, law enforcement, and legal professionals who find, collect, and examine forensic evidence in the performance of their duties. Broadcast live on your desktop and mobile devices bi-weekly on Thursday evenings, 7 to 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, live on our YouTube channel, www.forensicweek.com. We are a proud member of the Hangout10.com live TV webcast network, which is a series of shows brought to you live using Google+, a social networking service. Laura, tell our viewers how to ask questions, make comments, and keep watching.
Thanks, Tom. Hi, everyone, and thank you for watching ForensicWeek.com. If you have any questions, comments, or ideas for future shows, please email us at forensicweek@gmail.com. If you're watching this show live and you have a question for one of our guests, you can use the comment box below, and we'll bring that up and ask on air. You can also tweet us at Forensic Week. If you like this episode, please click the subscribe button on YouTube. You can watch all archive shows 24/7 online at forensicweek.com. You can also find us on Facebook by searching for the ForensicWeek.com show. Like and share our page. Thanks, and back to you, Tom.
Thank you, Laura. Laura, did you start the semester? Did the semester start already for you?
Yes, it started like 3 weeks ago.
Okay. Is this your last semester?
Yes, it is. One class left.
And then I lose you. That, you know, the great thing about having students working with you, as soon as they get their degree, they're out there finding jobs, which I guess is a good thing. But Laura's been with us for 2 weeks, and we really appreciate it. And good luck in the semester, Laura. Thank you. Okay, we have a panel of 4 guests this evening, and I want to introduce our first one because many of you who view Forensic Week before have seen her, Dr. Quanda Stevenson. Dr. Stevenson is the Assistant Professor and Program Director for Criminal Justice, Juvenile Justice Studies, Computer Forensics minor, Forensics minor, and Child Advocacy Studies training at the Athens State University, Alabama, and a board member of the Athens Limestone Children's Advocacy Center. Dr. Stevenson has been on, as I told you before, and I sent her an email. I said, is there any new issues, things that you think are important that we need to get out, content we need to get out? And she presented this topic this evening. So, for one, I would like to welcome Dr. Stevenson, and maybe tell us a little bit about why you believe our topic is important.
Hi, everyone. First, Tom, I want to thank you again for allowing us to be on the show tonight with you, and I also want to thank the panel for being here and participating on the show with me tonight. When we talked about this topic, Tom, I told you I had some experts and practitioners in the field who were able to act as panel members, and I'm glad to have them on the show tonight, and I'm glad that they are participating. As I mentioned before, I'm not going to talk too much tonight because I want those panel experts to participate and talk in their various expertise, such as the courts, counseling, therapy, and with forensic interviewing. So, but the purpose, like getting back to your question of us having this discussion tonight, there are several different reasons, but the main reason is, as you discussed earlier, we want to kind of answer some of those questions in regard to the controversy between and the debates that everyone is having between the issues of should we use forensic interview current day? Should we use forensic interviewing in regard to sexual abuse cases with our children, in regard to provide evidence in court and help their case to find out the outcome, adjudication of the case? So that's what I want us to talk about tonight. And of course, as always, as a professor, I'm always concerned about education. So I want us to be able to answer some questions and provide information to those individuals who are interested in working with children and assisting in regard to forensic interviewing and counseling.
Thank you, Dr. Stevenson, and let me introduce our panel, thanks to you that are here with us this evening. First, we have Claire Tinney-Jones, an attorney in private practice, who also represents the Limestone County Department of Human Resources in cases dealing with abused and neglected children. She is a former deputy district attorney with the Limestone County District Attorney's Office in Alabama, where her practice areas included cases involving juveniles. She is also a member of the Child Advocacy Center. Claire, thank you very much for being with us this evening.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. And Susan McGrady, a forensic interviewer, and I'm going to be, as soon as we're done introducing our guests, my first question is going to be to you, Susan. As a forensic interviewer, she's the director of the Child Advocacy Center in Limestone County. Her center is located and collaborates with Athens State University and all of the other Children Advocacy Center in the state of Alabama, especially the National Child Advocacy Center in Huntsville, Alabama. Her center conducts forensic interviews and prepares children for court. They counsel abused children and provide resources for them through a multidisciplinary team made up of nurses, doctors, school administrators, police, counselors, attorneys, etc. Thank you very much, Susan, for being here.
Thank you for having me.
We were having some technical difficulties, but we got you in there.
We got it.
All right. Marcia Milliken serves as the executive director of the Minnesota Children's Alliance, which promotes the development, growth, and continuation of children's advocacy centers and multidisciplinary teams. Marcia, now I'm from Boston, so if you keep hearing saying Marcia, I'm really talking to you, okay?
Okay.
Okay, very good. All right, let's, Susan, I want to start with you because, again, forensic interviewing, you are a forensic interviewer. What exactly does that mean? Our viewers need to understand what we're talking about when they hear that term.
When we're talking about forensic interviewing of children, forensic interviewers are trained. I'm trained at the National Children's Advocacy Center on how to do the best possible non-leading interview of children who are alleged victims of any sort of prosecutable crime. Most of the children that we interview are alleged victims of sexual abuse. There's a format, like I said, lots of training goes into this, and we bring the children in. It's a one-on-one interview at our center. It's myself and the child, law enforcement, DHR, parts of our, like you mentioned, the multidisciplinary team. They are in the building, however, they're watching from another room, watching from a screen. But the forensic interview with the child is to get details of the alleged crime in that child's words.
Okay, so is there a certification for forensic interviewers? Does that require special training that you receive? Do police officers get that same training?
Anyone who's a member of the multidisciplinary team can receive that training, or anyone who is affiliated with a child advocacy center. The training is a 40-hour training, and then we attend other trainings and seminars, symposium, just for continuing education. The forensic interview is a model. The National Children's Advocacy Center is who set forth our model of interviewing. And it's really kind of a funnel effect. And you start out very broad. You talk to the kids about, you know, their name, their birth date, what do they do for fun, where do they go to school, and you build a lot of rapport, really, depending on the age of the child. And then you work into who do you stay with, where do you stay, and you go from there. Open-ended questions, and you just let them tell their story. When they get to the disclosure part of their interview, if they get there, then you get a little more specific, but still always open-ended. The question we ask most during an interview is, tell me about that. If they say, I have a puppy, tell me about that. And that just leaves that question open so they can tell you about that. So the format is a great way for them to just use their own words.
Do reports of child abuse are you getting them from the police, or from the schools, or both?
Right.
And do the police tend to want an advocacy center to begin the interview process before they get involved?
Well, in our area, state laws and different multidisciplinary team protocols, and depending on mandatory reporting in different states and areas, mandate some of that. The way it is in Limestone County in Athens, a report of child abuse is either made to DHR, which is Child Services, or to law enforcement. If a child happens to go to the hospital, law enforcement and DHR are both called. Law enforcement or DHR will call the Child Advocacy Center to set up a forensic interview with me. So I don't receive referrals from schools or from outside people, from parents, things like that. My referrals come directly from law enforcement or DHR, which is Child Services.
Claire, I'd be interested in hearing from you as an attorney and as a former deputy district attorney. Has that worked out well? Because I think of the investigative process as a process,
Right.
and the owner of the process is the prosecutor. Okay.
Right.
So, how do you see? Is this working well? Are there issues in where the process begins?
It actually does work really well because it gives all of the players, all the members of the team, law enforcement, DHR, medical, if there's medical evidence involved, it gives everyone sort of a central base and a starting point for the process. Everybody kind of is on the same page. They know what the other agency is doing. They can work together, with their evidence. It's a whole lot easier, and I think that it has improved communication greatly amongst these different agencies because they do kind of have that central location and that central starting point, and they're able to then talk openly and work together and establish, those relationships that are so crucial to making sure that a case has all the evidentiary elements that it needs at the outset.
Law enforcement tends to shy away from anybody who isn't law enforcement.
Historically, yes, that's sort of the perception. But I think one of the beauties of multidisciplinary teams is that gives them a way to establish personal relationships with the with DHR, with medical, with schools, and it sort of bridges some of those gaps in some of those areas. And fortunately, we're a small community, so it's a lot easier, I think, for us than probably it is in some larger areas where the volume of people that can be involved in these things is so great.
May I interject something?
Go ahead,
May I
Susan.
interject something to Claire? What Claire was speaking to. We are a smaller area. One of the multidisciplinary team approach, I think for everybody, has been phenomenal. It's we all, as I like to say, play in the sandbox well together. We all call each other on our cell phones, text each other. We work really well. And I feel like one of the reasons you were talking about training earlier, the National Children's Advocacy Center also has regional advocacy centers. And these regional people, they have trainers. And gosh, probably almost 5 years ago, we had a trainer from one of the regional offices of the National Center come and train our multidisciplinary team on this is why it's beneficial to your role. This is why it's beneficial to the child, to the family, to prosecution, to arrest. We had trainings with them, and I think really that was really when our multidisciplinary team got kicked off and really started working well together, and we just really have a great team.
Very good. Marcia, you're out in Minnesota. Are you experiencing the same kind of things, or are there differences there? Marcia, are you there?
I am here. I am here. Can you hear me? Okay, sorry about that. Our Children's Advocacy Centers operate pretty well the same as they do down in Alabama, and we also use that multidisciplinary team approach. There are many advantages to using that team approach. You asked about, law enforcement, and I think that one of the advantages about having a forensic interviewer doing the interview is that the other professionals are able to observe the interview, but they're also able to feed questions into the interview so they get their professional questions answered as well. And so everybody's able to do the job that they're there to do without having to re-traumatize kids.
How about forensic nurses? We had a show with the International Association of Forensic Nursing, and are they engaged in this area, or is it nurses in general?
In our area, there is. We have a sexual assault nurse that is part of our team, and so she has made that connection with our local hospital very good, and we have a great working relationship with our hospital, and a lot of that is due to the involvement of our SANE nurse.
One of the things that we're finding in Minnesota is that, especially in the rural communities where there aren't as many physicians that have that specialized training, is that SANE pediatric nurses are what they're turning to provide the medical treatment that's needed. For example, in Minnesota, we have 5 specialized physicians that are experts in this field, but they're not able to reach all 87 counties. And so SANE pediatric trained nurses are the ones who we rely on frequently.
I'm interested in understanding when a report comes in or an allegation is made about a child. I remember bringing my son to the hospital. My son is now 34, 35 years old. Maybe he's 36. I know if he watches this, I'm going to hear from him. But I remember when he was a young kid, he was trying to see my dad going on a plane, and I grabbed him and I pulled his arm back, not to go on the plane, and his arm got hurt, and I immediately bring him to the hospital, and I got the 3rd degree, and that's okay, but so where does the maybe this is for you, Claire, where does the legal process begin, and who decides when the legal process, that process starts?
Well, I think the process begins immediately because you start gathering evidence immediately. The forensic interview is sort of the starting point, depending on the circumstances. Now, that could vary depending on, the type of circumstances, but for the most part, it's going to start at the at the interview stage, because that's when you start gathering that evidence.
At the hospital. In this, using my example,
Right.
at the hospital?
Oh, at the hospital. I mean, yeah, I mean, I think especially if law enforcement is called and they start the process of speaking with you or speaking with, the medical staff, your evidence is being gathered at that point. And then then it's going to be up to law enforcement whether they pursue it as far as criminal charges. A lot of times they consult with district attorneys or, see what social services is doing, but I think the process starts immediately because at the very beginning is where you're going to get some of your most crucial evidence.
Does if in fact during a forensic interview you're gathering evidence and it is pretty obvious that you believe you have a child abuse case,
right?
Does the child advocate have to bring the police in, or is there a different avenue that they can go? I mean, is the police necessary at that point?
I think it's a judgment call, and I think it depends on the situation. They're not always, in your situation, that's probably something that there's a very good explanation for, and it's not going to rise to the level of them thinking they need to call law enforcement. But once they've made that decision that they're going to call law enforcement, then that starts the ball rolling.
Okay. So if they believe they have a criminal act,
right?
Does the police have to be called in, or can they go right to the prosecutor's office?
Well, no, normally they call in law enforcement. The law enforcement is who actually works the case, but the majority of the time, the prosecutor's office is called in as well. They kind of guide the investigation, but it's the officer that's working the case that is in the trenches, making those decisions.
Is there any issues of credibility when a forensic interviewer gathers information and whether what they gathered was valid and reliable? Because it's difficult sometimes, even for adults. I mean, when we interview adults, getting them to tell us what they really, what they perceive is what their reality is. So, what kind of training does the forensic investigator have to try to determine that what the child is saying is in fact valid and reliable? Anybody can jump in.
I know law enforcement has their own training standards that they have to adhere to, but that's one of the beauties of utilizing your multidisciplinary team, because you can bring in varying people that all have different hats and different roles. You can bring them all together as sort of a sounding board. Okay, here's the information I've gathered. Prosecutor, do you think this rises to the level of criminal conviction? DHR, social services, do you think this rises to the level of removing a child from their parents' home? So you have all these different people that weigh in, as you're determining how you're going to proceed with your case.
And two, when we get a call, when we have a referral for a forensic interview for a child, we, as I already said, child services or law enforcement is who calls us. But we make sure, as the interviewing section of MDT, that if child services calls, that law enforcement is aware. If law enforcement is aware, we just, we might just say, hey, did you call law enforcement? Because if the child comes to our office, child services and law enforcement are aware.
Mm-hmm.
Marcia, is that the same out in Minnesota?
Yes, it's the same in Minnesota. I've also worked in Illinois. It's the same in Illinois. I think in most places the referrals are the same way. It's either law enforcement, child protection, and they either are required by law or practice to cross-report when a case has come in.
So is it my understanding that there are times then when maybe it goes to law enforcement first, and they may not believe that they have the resources to do a forensic interview? So are there times when the police actually call the Advocacy Center in to conduct the forensic interview for them? Is that something that happens?
I know in our county, we, the CAC, we interview all children who are alleged victims. So our city law enforcement, county law enforcement, child services, they call us and we do all of those interviews for them. We do that for them.
Who deals with the parents in these cases when the parents are suspect? Where does that whole process come in? Anybody want to jump in?
Well, at our center, if the parent is the alleged offender, our rule at our center is if we know that you're an alleged offender, you don't come to our center. So either another parent or any non-offending caregiver that they have will bring them to us for interview. So if mom's the alleged offender, we try everything we can that mom is not the one that brings the child. And it just works well, and then we can stick to our rule of this is a safe place for kids.
And you know, law enforcement are going to conduct their own interviews of alleged victims, and DHR is going to conduct their own interviews of alleged victims. And you know, if it rises to the level that it looks like criminal charges are going to be brought, a lot of times those parents go and just get their own attorneys, and that's their voice.
Now, Claire, as a private attorney now, are you representing alleged perpetrators?
No. I represent the Department of Human Resources.
Okay. All right. So that's your.
I don't work for them. I'm a private attorney, but they're my only client.
Ah. Okay. Okay.
So when a child has to be removed from the home, then I would file the paperwork in juvenile court and be the department's attorney in those proceedings.
Okay. All right. I'm interested in the training, the interview process. Because again, we're putting a label forensic interviewing, and I still can't get my hands around that and how it's different from interviewing anyone else. So I'm going to throw that out and ask if anybody wants to share that with our viewers in what unique skills are required to get to the same end as interviewing an adult.
Well, I can speak to that. Again, I said my training was through the National CAC, the National Center. The difference in my own words, in a law enforcement interview or an interview with an adult and a child is pretty simple. Children react to things differently. The children here are victims, or alleged victims, so they're not, you don't want to put them on the defensive. You want to make it as comfortable as possible. The training is a 40-hour training, and then initially a 40-hour training. And you asked earlier about a certification program, and I don't think I spoke to that. Currently, the National Center's training, there is not a certification per se. There are organizations talking about doing that. But in order to do a child forensic interview, you have to have gone through your 40-hour training. Practice, doing multiple interviews, that will hone your skills. But what I also love about, and I think this speaks to just hands-on training, is when I'm doing the interview and I'm following the model that I was trained. During that interview, I may take a break, tell the child, keep playing with Play-Doh or whatever we're doing in the room at the table. I'll step out. I go to my law enforcement, to my child service worker, and I'll say, what else do you need? Or if I feel like I'm just not getting anywhere, give me some ideas. And then we go back in. And I think each interview is really a learning experience. So we're given that model, and we're given that best practice for that child. Because the child is it's such a horrible time for that child. We try to make them as comfortable as possible. But I think that following that protocol, But I think each interview is a learning experience because every child's different. Every child speaks differently. Every child, just because you're verbal doesn't mean you're interviewable. There's just so many different things. So I feel like having that team there in my building at the interview is important because we can, even during that interview, step out, let's take a little break, and get their input on that specific interview. And I think that's part of it. Once you have your training, you have to focus on the interview, the family, the child, the crime at hand.
Mm-hmm.
Does that help at all?
Tom, I would also like to add, when you were talking about training,
Mhm.
we have the CAST certificate program that we offer training across the United States to any individual who is a practitioner or who wants to become a practitioner to help work with children who are abused. And Marcia is actually one of the instructors in that program. You gave her credit for working at the University of Minnesota, but she actually works as an adjunct instructor for me in the CAST program. So that's why she's a part of the panel tonight. So I would like for her to kind of talk about the courses that she's teaching in that regard. We offer in that program 3 main courses, and it totals 10 hours. And Marcia teaches, she's taught all 3, and at various points in times she would teach 1 or 2 per semester. So if you want to talk a little bit about that to give him more information on that training, that would be great.
Yes, Marcia, please.
Yes. Would you like me to talk about all 3 of them? Just
Yes.
give a quick, okay. The first course is kind of like an introduction to the issues surrounding child abuse. One of the things that I think is really important is it's a time for the kids to learn not only about the issues surrounding child abuse, but also to examine their own values, because very often when you're working with kids who have been abused or families, it's important to separate your values from your professional responsibility instead of imposing what you think they should be doing versus professionally what they should be doing. The second course is a global advocacy study program, which is very, very exciting because students look at what child advocacy is like in other countries. One of the books that we use is Half the Sky, which looks at what it's like to be a woman and child in other countries. Each student looks at a different country and examines the child abuse issues, but also education and marriage and all kinds of cultural issues. They also are required to go to 3 cultural events that are something different than what they normally do to expand their knowledge. And then the third course is an extension kind of the first course, and it really talks about the process, working within the system. It takes a look at child protection, what does law enforcement do. It talks a little bit about the protocols for forensic interviewing. So they get to examine that aspect, the whole process from beginning to end. We talk a little bit about the prosecution, what it's like to be a witness, as well as vicarious trauma, because when you've been in this field, eventually you have that vicarious trauma, and it's important that they are at least aware of it when they go into the field. So those are basically the 3 courses.
Now, is this training online or is this classroom training?
It's online.
Right now it's online.
Okay.
It's online. All 3 courses.
So,
all
I'm
3
sorry.
all 3 courses are online, and you can take them during any one of the semesters, fall, spring, and summer. And we're actually moving forward now with offering a practitioner side where social workers and we're working on attorneys to be able to continue their education through our CLL office, which is continuing learning, and they can earn their CEUs and their CLUs.
Okay. All right. Now, our viewership is international. We have people listening to us now, or will listen to us from all over the country and other countries. So we know what you all are doing in those areas. How prevalent is the success that you've had? Are there areas of the country who are not doing this at all? Is there some issues? Well, I think there are. That there are some cases, some jurisdictions where they're not allowing this process for whatever reason, and I need to know what that reason is. Anybody want to jump in?
Well, I would like to just kind of add a little bit on to your question, Tom. I know you said I was acting as a co-facilitator tonight, but I know when you were saying before about trying to get to the heart of the controversy, I would like for the panel guests to talk specifically about some of the maybe considered flaws or negatives about the forensic interviewing process that would deem this controversy that we're seeing that exists right now. I mean, what is going on with the flaws? What are some of the possible issues that a prosecutor might not want to use the forensic interviewing as evidence for a case? What are some of those reasons?
Okay. Claire, I think we'd have to start with you.
Well, you know, the very obvious thing, which I think sometimes can be a misconception, is that a child they do their forensic interview up front, and that's the beneficial part of that is it prevents them from having to tell their story to 4 or 5 different people during the investigation process. But they are going to have to, 9 times out of 10, testify at trial, because it's got to be the best evidence. And you know, there's arguments, there's been case law on the hearsay issue of a forensic interview. And so if the child is available, it's going to have to follow, you know, what our laws say and what our, you know, procedures say as far as being the best evidence and giving that testimony in court. You know, you run the risk of maybe it's 5 years and their story, you know, deviates, and then the defense counsel gets a copy of the forensic interview and they try to, you know, pull apart the discrepancies between what the child said, you know, 5 years previously at their forensic interview and what the child's saying when they're on the stand. So, you know, that's a risk that you run with any time you've got an interview, but it's going to be that way with any interview.
Absolutely.
You do, from another perspective, there is a way, I know in Alabama with juvenile law, if it is a proceeding where you're looking at, say, terminating a child's parental rights, and you've got a case that's in dependency court and juvenile court, you do have a mechanism, a statute that allows for that interview to be used instead of the child's testimony if the child's under 12. So in those type of situations, you can use your interview as your evidence.
Wait a minute. Are you saying that if the child's under 12, so that's an exception to the hearsay rule? Is that correct?
It is in juvenile law in Alabama, not in criminal cases.
Okay.
In criminal cases, the child's going to have to testify at trial.
Okay, but in a juvenile, okay, yeah, but if the suspect is an adult, then it's not a juvenile case.
Well, unless it's the type of case where you're trying to terminate the parent's parental rights.
Okay. All right. Is that the same thing in Minnesota?
Yeah, one of the problems that we're seeing with forensic interviews is forensic interviews are supposed to be neutral and fact-finding, and I think that that's what all the protocols teach, is that it is neutral, it is fact-finding, it's not leading. But at least in Minnesota and a few other states, because we work so closely with prosecution and law enforcement, it's being argued in court that really we are an arm of the prosecution and that we are looking for abuse, and so really it is not neutral because we are an arm of the prosecution. And there are defense attorneys who are doing a really great job of, no matter how much we try not to ask leading questions, defense attorneys are starting to do a really good job of saying, well, I think that's a leading question, and, you know, really getting the jury to doubt whatever the child says. That's what we're seeing as far as questioning the forensic interview.
Yeah, I'd love to hear comments about the 12 people who aren't smart enough to get out of jury duty, the jury. All right? How, in your opinion and experience, how are the juries taking this information? Are they giving it value in the courts?
As far as the forensic interviews, how are they taking the forensic interviews versus the child's testimony?
Right.
You know, it's going to depend on if any of the forensic interview actually comes into evidence. You know, if you've got your child testifying, then usually where you hear about your forensic interview is on cross-examination when the defense attorney is trying to pick apart the child's testimony based on what they said at their forensic interview.
I would imagine that is a really difficult situation in the defense. I mean, I would just see so many holes that the defense could try to create over there.
Right.
So how do you try to prevent that from happening?
You just, well, and one of the others may want to speak as far as preparation, you know, of your witness. That has a lot to do, you know, that's important that your witness is prepared to know their testimony, know their story, be comfortable enough with the process and have seen the courtroom and feel like they have people in their corner so that they're relaxed and at ease when they're actually giving their testimony. You know, it's a lot of the success of it's going to do with how well your witness presents him or herself.
And I think one of the things too, and this is just from me testifying in court, is that the education piece, even if that forensic interview, if the video is not played, or if the defense is knocking holes in it, one thing that I've been able to do is be put on the stand by the DA and just ask questions about why do you see, what's your opinion on why children leave out something, you know, 5 years later? Why do they leave out? Why do they omit? Why don't they know the exact date anymore? And so just that education piece, to be able to get on the stand and educate a jury of 12 people who don't do this every day, just on that small piece of why did this detail change? Well, there's a lot of times, and especially children that abuse has been going on for years and years or multiple times, they're not going to remember every single time. So just that interviewer or that advocate to be able to testify just to those type things, so that maybe the DA says something like, so if the child said a different day, or if the child said they were in this room but they were in this room during the interview, just giving that education piece to the jury, I feel like is a huge piece.
You know, one thing that makes it so difficult is for the 12 jurors, a lot of them just have a hard time understanding that this happens all the time. You know, and you have to overcome that hurdle as well. They just don't want to believe that someone could actually do these things to their children.
I can believe that. I can certainly believe that. And I can just imagine how defense attorneys can really make them believe that, you know, that the children, what they believe happened didn't happen, and as soon as you start getting contradictions, and then there's this question in the mind of the trier of facts, and then all of a sudden, are you frustrated that a lot of people who are guilty of child molestation, child abuse, are getting off because of the process as it is? Is there some frustration there? I see smirks on all your faces. So who's gonna
well, I think
something?
it's just a necessary. I mean, it's just comes with the territory. I don't know that there's any way to fix it. it's just sort of the way it is, sadly.
I got an answer to fix it. The criminal justice system we have to do away with our jury system, and we have to take some lessons from England and have judge panels. We need to have panels of people who understand the law and who can't be manipulated by wonderful attorneys who do their job well.
Hey, Tom, I think this is a discussion for another show for us. That's going to take a long time for us to talk about that.
Yeah, I know.
Well, and I think, too, with our judges, and our judges have a lot of different cases. And these cases are not the majority of what they see. And I think educating judges on the validity of whether it's that multidisciplinary process, whether it's on forensic interviewing, but educating the judges as well on the process and why we, as a team, feel like that it's valid is another thing that I just feel like would help tremendously, because no offense to judges, but they do a lot, and these are as many as we know there are, and as many as we interview, as many children. It's very small compared to all the other cases they hear. Does that make sense?
I'm looking at the clock, and I see that we only have 10 minutes left. And part of what we do in ForensicWeek.com that I think is really important, because we have many students at all ages listening to this show who are looking to decide what they want to do when they grow up, and so for college students, high school, people who might be interested in working with children, are concerned about these issues, who really believe that this is something they would want to do. Where do they start? What should they do? What kind of major should they have in college? Are there jobs with the Department of Human Resources that what are they called? What about people who want to be police officers but really want to ensure that they have the right, that they develop the skills before they even get to that point? So I just threw a bunch of things out there. So why don't we just start at one end? I want to have each one of you share that in the next minute. So I'm going to start from. I'm going to look at my thumbnails, and I'll start with Claire, and we'll work across. Claire?
Well, I think doing some job shadowing early on is a great idea, because some of this is so specialized. When I went to law school, I had no idea that these types of careers, professions, niches even existed. So I think that, doing some job shadowing early on, and then picking a major that is general, whether you want to do social work, whether you want to do family development and human studies, whether you want to do, any of those types of things that deal with people, even education.
We have a department at the University of Maryland, Family Studies.
Mm-hmm.
I have no idea what that major is. The only reason why I know they exist is because they're in the same building as me, okay? And they used to let me, but they had a house that was fully furnished, that they did their seminars in the kitchen, in the bedroom, in the living room. I don't know why they did that, but I used it as a crime scene. They let me use it once a semester as a crime scene. Does that department of family studies, does that relate to what we're talking about here? Can anybody?
I think it really relates.
Mm-hmm. I actually have had two interns. Actually, the intern we have in our office right now, that is her major. She'll graduate in May, and we had another with that major who, in 2011, and we hired her as our family advocate, and so she is our advocate right now, and that was her major. I think it seems to be a good broad major, a good broad, like Claire said. If you work with people, if you want to work with people, there are some good basic education things that you can do.
Claire mentioned shadowing, and that's great, but some communities shy away from students doing that because they're concerned with legal reasons or or what privacy issues, etc. Does your communities allow interns, college interns, shadowing? What about at the high school level? Because we get a lot of calls from high schools that have these programs where a high school student has to find a job to shadow or do an internship in a professional environment. This is high school now. So is there possibilities there?
There are possibilities, but I think that what you said is exactly correct. We do have some issues when it comes to confidentiality. I have a lot of students who intern. I've had some who've interned with Susan at her Child Advocacy Center on our campus, and some who have interned with Claire at the DA's office. So yes, and to answer your question about the high school part, in Alabama, I don't think we have gotten to that point that other states have been more progressive in regard to allowing students to actively intern or shadow unless it's shadowing the parent or going to work with the parent. We don't have a lot of those pre-college type programs as other states have, where the child can start in the 10th, 11th, and 12th grade already kind of focusing on a specific subject or part of education that they would like to receive when they go to college.
Mm-hmm.
But I participate in internships. I support internships. I value that part of the education process. As Marcia and I mentioned before, we require it in the child advocacy program that we offer at our university. So I think that it is a vital part, but then we also do have to worry about confidentiality.
Do all jurisdictions around the country have child advocacy centers? They may call them different things within the Department of Human Resources, or so. I mean, we're talking about, you guys have been talking about your own areas, but is what we're talking about generally the same throughout the countries, the 50 states?
No, it's not.
Okay.
In fact, there's still a lot of room for growth. Part of it is, can communities sustain a child advocacy center? Part of it is developing that multidisciplinary team that will work within a child advocacy center. I can speak for Minnesota. We have 87 counties and we only have 7 children's advocacy centers. Because there's such a large rural area, they have difficulty in finding the funds to open a children's advocacy center and sustaining a center. So the concentration for the last few years has been setting up multidisciplinary teams and using that concept without having the formal building. I know other states are facing some of the same things. It would be wonderful if every single county or every jurisdiction could have a child advocacy center. And I would say that that's the ultimate goal, but there's a lot of room for growth still.
Okay, so what's happening in jurisdictions that have no advocacy center close by or whatever, and they have an issue? Does it get handled like any other case, and the police just do whatever they can do the best way they know how?
I'm not sure how it is in Alabama. Alabama has the National Child Advocacy Center, which has I think it's one of the. Minnesota has one of the top protocol training centers, as does Alabama. In Minnesota, we have Corner House, which trains, I think, the same number of people as the National Children's Advocacy Center. So one of the advantages where we are at is that we have law enforcement and child protection trained on how to do a forensic interview in every single county. So we're fortunate that we have people that are trained that may not be within a child advocacy center. But in other states where they don't have that luxury, it's just really concerning as to what might happen if a child's abused.
There's a wonderful organization, the International Association of Identification, and it's a forensic science. There's the two largest forensic science organizations in the world is the American Academy of Forensic Sciences and the International Association of Identification. and they have IAI especially has certification programs in various skill sets. We are negotiating with them right now to be for them to be co-sponsor of this show, where we can gather more content together and share. Are folks from your community getting to those people? Are you speaking at some of these conferences where law enforcement and forensic scientists are meeting, trying to learn new skills and what's important for them? Because I haven't seen it personally, but that doesn't mean anything.
We have the National Center being the next town over. They have a symposium every year where, I don't know, 20,000 people come, and they have break-off sessions and things like that. And it is for every member of a multidisciplinary team, medical, mental health, anybody, to come. And so that way, all the members of different disciplines worldwide, they can come to the symposium and get those pieces of, I guess, other people's pies. I'm involved in that. We spoke once at one of the trainings about collaborations with other CACs, about collaborations with other disciplines, just kind of an outreach support thing. But I know that is one of the biggest things here, that where other disciplines and other forensic specialists can come in and learn what's going on.
Right. I mean, I think this is so important. The interview process is a difficult thing, as it is when you're dealing with adults, and it's only exacerbated with children, and trying to do that well, and to understand them. I start thinking about family studies and in the human resources and the various types of skills that police officers don't have that certainly would help them. And I really believe it's really important for police officers to get that training at the beginning. Unfortunately, many times law enforcement officers don't get the training they need till later on in their careers, and yet they're out in the street, 24 hours, and they may deal with a case with a child, and they haven't got a clue, Well, I see the time is up, and first of all, I want to thank Dr. Stevenson for bringing this topic up and bringing this panel together. This has been great, and I hope that in the oncoming days and weeks and months that we have a lot of viewers coming to listen to this and to bring this issue up and to identify its importance. And if in the future, if any of you have other things that you'd like to talk about and get it out and have Forensic Week help you do that, we would love to have you. Before I say goodbye to you, let me just mention a couple of things to our viewers. In the next several shows that we're getting ready to plan. One, we're hoping to get the staff from the serialpodcast.org organization. For those of you viewers who are familiar with serialpodcast.org, they had their first season that debuted in October 2014. They had 12 episodes talking about a 1999 homicide in Baltimore of a high school student. And her ex-boyfriend was arrested and convicted for that crime. And the question is today, as he spends the rest of his life in prison, whether he truly committed the crime. There was no physical evidence to even put him at the crime scene. It was simply from the testimony of somebody. Anyways, this show went viral worldwide. And we're trying to get some of the staff who did that show and the host to come on our show. And what I want to do is have some people who lived and breathed that whole 12-episode series from around the country to be on the show to ask questions. So we're trying to work that out right now. Hopefully it will happen soon. We also have a couple of firearms identification and tool mark examiners who I worked with recently and that helped us at the University of Maryland. We have never had a firearms identification and toolmark examiner. We've had the subject, but not the examiners, to talk about what their day is like in examining ammunition and firearms and tool marks and impressions from crime scenes. So we are setting up a show with them. We also have a couple of directors of crime laboratories from major urban police departments who are going to talk to us about administering and managing a crime scene and what that's like in the hiring process and who they're looking for the future. So with that, I'd like to thank Dr. Quanda Stevenson, Claire Tinney-Jones, Susan McGrady, and Marcia, Milliken, all members of Child Advocacy Centers. I want to thank them very much for their time in their sharing their expertise in bringing this subject to light. Appreciate it very much. I also want to thank Laura Pachuki, our producer, for her continued support on our show. ForensicWeek.com is being brought to you through the cooperation of the Hangout10.com live TV show network. We recommend that you go to the Hangout10.com website and see the schedule of other shows like this available for you to learn and be entertained. Thank you for watching this show, and we will see you next time on ForensicWeek.com.
College Park, and produced by Laura Pachuki and Jamal Francis.